General Ibrahim Babangida, as Nigeria's military president, once quipped that all economic theories never work in Nigeria. This statement has been taken since then as gospel truth. But is that correct? Why do economic theories never work in public policy in Nigeria? Are there things we are missing out when we set out our models and implement them in our economy? Other schools of thought have lately challenged what is received wisdom in the field of economics. For example, a concept as fundamental as equilibrium is challenged by subscribers to new theories in economics, such as complexity economics. These adherents say it may not be true sometimes that equilibrium is always attained. For example, when wages go up, economies may not see a commensurate loss of employment. In fact, the opposite, more employment, may be the case as people have more money to establish small enterprises and employ others. Nick Hanauer, an American billionaire, in a famous TED Talk recently, also held that the concept that the price of something is always equal to its value is innately false, and that things command the value that they are able to negotiate. Therefore, CEOs of companies who sometimes earn 1,000 times the average wage of the normal person may not really be 1,000 times as productive as everyone else, but are able to negotiate a better deal for themselves. Hanauer therefore posits that modern economics has been working only for a few rich guys. Next is the idea that the human being is perfectly calculating, utility maximizing, perfectly selfish, and self-maximizing. In other words, homo economicus. Is it true, the concept of homo economicus? Here in Africa, many things are done for friends and family, which are not based on a calculating desire to maximize advantage. Joining us today to look at this and also discuss where economics is and where it ought to be heading is Dr. Rauf Aliyu, an economist, public policy expert, and strategy consultant. Welcome, Dr. Rauf.
Thank you very much, sir.
So you heard some of what I said. Where do you stand in all of this confusion about what economics is and has become?
For me, I think I'm not a fan of theories. I'm a pragmatist, and I think your history should drive economics, and that there are lots of lessons from history. So for me, I'm of the view that history and culture of each society should be the foundation.
So you don't believe in all this mathematization where, some guys are brought in mathematics. In fact, let me even quickly say this. When I was doing my master's in financial derivatives abroad, there's this formula for the calculation of options when there's this financial instrument called options. And that formula was made up of two things. The formula for dispersal from physics and also something called the Ito's lemma. This Ito's lemma, when you have dilemma, trilemma, it was a formula derived by a Japanese professor, but he could not explain how he derived it. So they jammed these two together and they created what they call the Black-Scholes formula, which put the world in trouble in 2006-07. So you don't believe in because a lot of physicists, engineers, and co made it into the field of finance and economics, and look where we are today.
Yeah. Thank you. God bless my professor while I was in Ahmadu Bello University, Professor Abdulganiyu Garba, who has always been an advocate. And I think in one of the conferences, Nigerian Economic Summit, he had actually made Nigerian Economic Society. He actually made a presentation on the new methodology for teaching economics. And one of the things he had argued on was that we shouldn't be so keen about the application of mathematics and econometrics, because human being behavior is not an error term that you can estimate.
Exactly.
So to him, human beings have the pattern of behavior of human beings actually conditioned by society. So your understanding of society and how society evolves, and that now brings me back to the issue of complexity economics, how society evolves, where the evolutionary economics also comes from. So you can look at economics like biology. As societies are changing, human behavior also changes. So economic policies should evolve rather than trying to estimate. And one of the arguments also said that it was okay for mathematicians and other physicians to get into the field of economics. By the way, if you look at all the Nobel Prize winners, That is what they do. So when you have different methodology for teaching or different methodology for explaining economics, you're actually not really taken serious, even in international journals, except you have those papers who are funkified with models that are not explainable, which eventually goes on to win economic models. So no matter how good you are as an economist from Africa, and you are so tied to the basic foundations on how to explain economics, don't ever think you're going to be part of those who will be nominated for a Nobel Prize, because that is not what Nobel Prize economics are things that tries to explain the capitalist system. In recent years, you talk about behavioral economists, and what are they saying? It is because of the crisis in the financial market, so they wanted to know how human behavior drives greed, which still brings you back again to, now they admit that it's greed. Or you see how human beings, so you have people like Tversky's and Kahneman, who also won joint Nobel Prize, and what they were looking at how human beings make judgments. Again, they felt, okay, the reasons why those policies failed was because human beings made bad judgments, and they were, okay, how can you, and that's where psychologists, over period of time, psychologists also begin to win. And again, when you look at all for their work is, how can you nudge, or how can you explain how human beings take certain decisions? But the fundamental thing that makes that person to even that shapes the human being's behavior to even think in a certain way, because I keep on saying that where somebody sits will determine where he will stand. So if I'm sitting here, if I'm going to stand here, stand up, I'm going to stand here. I cannot sit here and stand there. So the society where I grew up from, how I see things will be entirely different from a society of somewhere else. So for me, I might have these arguments with those who schooled in the US or in the UK, where probably Ivy League universities, because we see things differently. My understanding of my society and the history of economic thoughts that they were taught, and mine, I had to learn economic history of the northern Nigeria, economic history of Kano trade. So I understand how society.
Was that deep? Did you go deep into that?
Yeah, it was deep.
Now that's remarkable.
Because here you could, when you go to places like Bayero University, there are a lot of economists and historians, economic historians, who have done a lot of work on industrialization in northern Nigeria, trying to look at entrepreneurs in north. And they try to make you why businesses have failed. I'm
not sure we had a lot of that in the South, really. We're more westernized in the South.
So for that, I don't know. And
always look at...
again, that's why, to an extent, again, sometimes I tell people, even when I meet corporate executive in Lagos, I tell them that Nigeria actually runs like a dual economy. Because if you sit in Lagos and try to make economic policies that does not agree or align with the socio-cultural values of certain segment of the country, whether it's a bank or whatever things, whatever products you design and develop.
I was reading, in fact, this morning I was reading an article, and the person was saying something like for example, the entire economy of the North is just 100 billion naira, $100 billion or something of that sort. But, when I look at Nigeria's export profile, apart from crude oil, the next thing is oil seeds, all these sesame seeds, sorghum, soya bean, some of these products are cash crops, hibiscus flower and all that. And a lot of that is going on in the north. So ginger, shea nuts,
shea butter,
and so on. So I thought that was a gross underestimation, but that is what's making it into public policy in Nigeria.
Yes, I think it's also, thank you for also bringing that. We also have this challenge of people who have not traveled much around Nigeria. People don't know the kind of export that leave between Sokoto and Niger. Undocumented export of foodstuff. They don't know the ones that happen between Jigawa from Megatari export processing zone also into Niger. You don't know the ones. People don't know how many trailers of goods leave Nigeria from Chad all the way to Central African Republic from the north, but they are basically undocumented. Unlike here, because they move through the ports, there's these issues are there. These are.
And of course, it's okay. I was in Kano about more than a year ago, and we were in Dawano market.
Yes.
And Dawano does about 5 billion naira worth of transaction every day in Dawano alone. The Dawano, there's also Gujungu in Jigawa State, I understand. Adeja, that area too. So, and a lot of this is, but the problem they had when we spoke with some exporters was, if they want to move their goods through the Nigerian port in Apapa, as the as a truck driver is going, you have to give him up to 500,000 for bribe.
Yeah, he used to settle, and he actually gets
So
into the custody products.
it's easier for them to take it out through Niger, through Republic of Benin, into Ghana. In fact, a lot of our goods, cassava, yam, hibiscus, all those things get exported through Ghana these days.
So they move from like you get your cements, I don't know, but if you take note, you find that Bua cement is not as popular.
Yes.
Like Dangote,
Dangote,
because Bua actually moves from Sokoto, and majority of Max actually moves from Niger up to Burkina Faso. So that's where the markets are. So most of the products actually move. You hardly see if you go into Sokoto, you hardly see the trucks coming down north. But it doesn't. But it has, and we continue to hear that it has these massive metric tons of production of cement, but they move out because there's also high demand for infrastructure across Africa. So some of the things is that the context. And also, don't also forget, one of the things I don't wanted to mention was that Alero, for instance, Alero to Tambuwal Belt have the best onions in the world.
Wow.
And this is also an onion, this is also a market that makes billions.
Yeah.
But again, it's not as if these are documented. It still runs within the informal. So you have wholesalers who come.
If not for the general lack of governance, it's still a function anyway of government to ensure that these things are documented. Because as things stand, we probably don't know the size of the Nigerian economy.
That's what it is.
And if you don't know the size of the economy, you don't know the trajectory of the economy, the composition, how then do you make policies?
So that's one of the problems. I think for us, even the GDP is actually based on proxy, just like the ease of doing business. The ease of business, when you look at reports also, you just take Lagos and to an extent you add Kano, and you look at it, you take them as a proxy for a while. For a long time, the reason why for a long time why Nigeria was not even doing well was because the focus was only in Lagos. So when Lagos is done, by the time you get to Kano, it pulls down. At a point in time, Lagos had to even lend technical support to Kano state government so that it can actually be for, because when the ease of doing business performance is high, Lagos feels okay. It's also to our benefit because the investment is actually coming to Nigeria. And when coming to Nigeria, we can now position ourselves as the destination to receive them. So it's coming to Nigeria because there's two things about investment also. You can be coming to invest in Nigeria, but again, which state in Nigeria are you going to? So those are challenges. So for me, generally, it's culture. And our people who do policies and even economists, one of the biggest challenge they have is that they also they need to learn what is called contextual intelligence. And unlike what we have in economists now, in the past, in the 70s all the way to 80s, I think where we used to have BSc, like in the school, in Ahmadu Bello University where I schooled, there used to be a bachelor's science degree, social sciences. Social sciences. So you have people who majored in economics, minored in sociology, majored in economics, minored in political science. So you have this combined honors issue, just like you have in Cambridge with the philosophy, politics, and economics. That give you a broad understanding. And secondly, also, for those who also agree with me, I don't know of other schools, but I don't know of even till now, but at the Ahmadu Bello University also where I schooled, we're trained to be policymakers.
Please, I want you to hold your thoughts there because I'm going to come back on that. I also tried to train myself in that way. We have been speaking with Dr. Abdurrauf Aliyu on issues regarding the economy, economic policy, and how this pertains to public policy making in Nigeria and what we can do better. Please stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers, and today we're speaking with Dr. Abdurrauf Aliyu, an economist, public policy expert, and strategy consultant. And earlier on, if you're just joining us, we had been discussing the need for contextual intelligence among those who make economic policies and even, if you like, social policies for the country. I know that this is something that's always worried me, Dr. Abdurrauf, because, going to university, even though I went to university, Ondo State University in the Southwest, I was just very curious. I wasn't chasing a first class. And so I kept taking electives in sociology, political science, geography, up till they stopped me. I didn't mind if they dragged down my grades. I had to be stopped that, no, you can't take electives anymore. But I just wanted to have a broad knowledge, and I think it's helping today. But I think we've come to the age where, for too long, Nigeria's economy has been managed by maybe experts, quote and unquote, especially those who are sent here by World Bank, IMF, Goldman Sachs, and so on, who seem to, number one, like you rightly said, perhaps very little or no knowledge of the topography of Nigeria, the cultures, and so maybe at the end of the day, this is why we're getting all of these results today. What do you think?
Yeah, you're actually also correct. You know, there's a book which I recommend that most people get to read. It's called The Prisoners of Geography. Yeah, by Tim Marshall. Tim Marshall used to be a writer with, I think, the Washington Post or so. I don't remember, but I actually made reference to the book because you mentioned geography. You know, we do economic geography, which actually helps you to understand patterns of transportation, movement. These things are very important. These are the contexts I'm talking about. That's why you need to broaden yourself.
Yeah.
So knowing just economics and focusing on the financial aspect of economics without actually understanding the pillars in which those things stand becomes defective. So in Prisoners of Geography, one of the things he actually tries to make you understand was that countries all over the world, and he actually talked about different countries, and talk about countries all over the world. Actually, they are prisoners of geography. They are prisoners of where they are located.
Yeah.
And that as a leader or a policymaker, you must understand the limitations and the constraints of that geography when making your policies. There are certain policies that are not your own to make, and you can never make it. If you make it, you are wasting your time, because the reality of that constraint of that geography will force you. So again, when you look out, when you go back to read the book, you get to understand what is happening in Russia. The book is quite 10 years old. You get to understand what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. So Ukraine is in a dilemma of geography, but they need to survive. So it's actually about survival.
Yeah.
And the only way, because Ukraine is also the only way to the warm water.
Okay.
Is through the Crimea. So it is not in the interest of anybody. It's not in the interest of Ukraine or that noise you make. So you also get to read the book. He tells you about what is happening in between the Palestinians and Israelis, and why it is why no matter what kind of noise Israeli politicians will make, there are certain policy decisions they can't do because they are constrained by the geography of what they have. So the investments they do in certain kind of policies, the investment they do in defense, is not because they want to do it, but they perceive that their neighbors are their enemies, and they need to have those armaments that would protect them. And that is why those investments must go there. Not because they want to do. That is the constraints of geography. So what would be the Nigeria's geographical
bars? So, the bars that are holding
so he has a sequel to the book where he talked about the Sahel region, and Nigeria was mentioned, and he listed all the crises you see between from Mali all down to Cameroon, northern Cameroon, and he tells you why it has been like that, and what you cannot do about it, and what you must do.
And Nigeria is becoming like a dumping ground. I was watching one guy from Mali, a young guy from Mali who was caught with some guns and a lot of ammunition and so on. And they were interviewing. He said, "Well, he's from Mali." So yeah, we have our own bad boys, but it seems that Nigeria is very attractive to all sorts of miscreants from Senegal to God knows where, Mali and
that now brings us back to even as an economics again, to go to full that the area of interest that I have put, where I have interest in recent years has been geoeconomics.
What?
Geoeconomics. Now this is geoeconomics, just like geopolitics. I'm trying to understand how countries position themselves to project economic power. And that has been my interest in the last 4 years. And what it means, how countries can weaponize the economic advantages they have has an advantage, because as a leader, one of the things you do when you do economic policies is not just policies for the sake of policy. It is policy for the economic security of your nation. So all the policy decisions you take have repercussions in other countries. They are going to react. But for you to have taken certain economic decisions, so even when you increase exchange rates, if you understand geopolitics, if the central bank is going to exceed exchange rate, for us, exchange is just a monetary policy. But in geopolitics, exchange rate can be a tool for war, because you're talking about if it is going to affect trade with other countries who are benefiting, and they also have something that you think you need, they weaponize it. They weaponize it and to fight you. So when we do policies, again, is that do we also, for each of the policies, do we do cost benefit analysis? Don't just look at it domestically.
Yeah.
But again, how will it help us? And how do we think other countries will react? These things are key. And that is why in policy making, at your economics level, where you also do bunch of grant strategy, and it is assumed that people who go into governance, no matter how it is, even expert in economics, you must know policy, you must know politics, you must know geography.
That in this very government, this administration, I'm still thinking, is there any economist anywhere near here?
I really don't think so. And people always tell you arguments.
Maybe you guys aren't pushful enough, because I remember when Buhari came in 2015, and what we had were lawyers. Lawyers were running Ministry of Works, running the economy, running almost everything, because lawyers are more pushful in politics. They always put themselves out. I learned this from actually running a political party. We had lawyers everywhere, and I realized that, look, you economists are probably too silent. And then you find lawyers and other sorts of people running, and they can't think maybe in the eclectic way that a well-rounded economics.
Lawyers are deal makers. And when they do things, for us, where you look at, where for me as an economist, from my background, based the fact that I also do, we do those basic courses in philosophy. We try to look at equity, fairness, even in policy decision making. These guys look at it from the deal making. They don't look at just as if they are deals. And if you look at even the first tenure, most of the lawyers who came already were working in equity firms, corporate lawyers, or they were sitting on the boards of companies. So I had written an article, and at that period I had written an article where I argued from an article that Paul Krugman had written, that a country is not a country. And no matter how much of things you think you know about the boardroom, it is not. And there are two different principles. While here you are here to maximize shareholder value. Exactly. Here you are here to maximize public value. Exactly. And public value stands on two philosophies. You need to understand that you must be fair, and you must balance fairness and merit. So even when you talk about merit in government, I begin to ask you, what is merit precisely? Because you need to, at some extent, you need to balance fairness and merit. And for those who actually argue much about Singapore, and I tell you, if you go online now, you go to even the Lee Kuan Yew public policy, in the last 2 years, most of research being tried out, they begin to question the principle of meritocracy, because over a period of time, all those who were products of merit are the ones who went to Ivy League universities. So being a vintage position, and they are able to send their children to Ivy League schools, and these kids are going to come back and take over from where they are. Yeah. So it has become very difficult for others to raise to the rank. So where do you now call? So even in Nigeria, we'll talk about merit. Who are those who eventually get it's not the same kids who went to Oxford and come back. Yeah. And how did they get to Oxford? Because their fathers were in a privileged position. Yeah. So at what period of time are you going to boss? So at each period, and when you have people in policies, all of them, you begin to have what a psychologist like what a psychologist called the group think. They begin to think alike. Yeah. Because so they see problem. They all schooled in London. They schooled in UK. Yeah. So they see all those. They see the Walmarts as the standard for what markets should look like. Yeah. And they forget that. And I keep on telling people, I was in Kenya recently. Most of the big malls in Kenya are empty. Wow. And those who actually mourn them, most if you see them, they're actually Arabs. So even an average Kenyan actually don't even go to shop because they don't have the power. Exactly. So it's still the expatriates who still go there. It's the kind of society you want, and that's the kind of societies you actually want to create.
I mean, there isn't a lot of thinking going into, even though I wanted to ask you about stakeholder versus shareholder, I think you've answered that. But I'm still worried that there isn't a lot of serious thinking going into our indigenous economies per se. What we mostly have is this cut and paste. Okay. The World Bank says this is how it should be, IMF says this is how it should be, cut and paste. For example, they tell you, it's good to borrow. Borrow, it depends on what you use it for. And we know when we're between that point at which we are borrowing and using, a lot of cultural issues intervene. We end up spending money in ways that we shouldn't and all. You just mentioned Kenya. Now, I've been in Kenya, and I remember going to Kenya, and I was in Westfield. And this Westfield was so guarded that about a few months later, I was shocked in 2013 when they said the place was invaded by Somalian terrorists and so on. It was impossible. You couldn't even take a picture in Westfield or even outside. I felt like Kenya was really a police state. I stood on Jomo Kenyatta Avenue just to take a picture. I was accosted, So I didn't quite like Nairobi. I didn't like Kenya. I prefer Uganda and so on, But you have made a very solid point. Now the Kenyans, much less than the Nigerians, they can't even approach many of those malls. Yeah. And the malls, I remember too, was populated by Europeans, even though they had a lot of good things. But here in Nigeria, because we're not that Europeanized, we still see a few, but we're neglecting the entire grassroots economy. So when we fly over to Lagos now, okay, in those days we would have gone by road, stopped in Lokoja, eat some food, go further down, buy something from the roadside. We've neglected those economies. Yeah. How do we go forward from here? Yeah, in 2 minutes.
I think it's just for us, again, just we talked about, we need to have economists who also begin to study our informal markets and find a way of how we can actually get to integrate them. Not change them, integrate them. I'm not saying formalize them, integrate them into mainstream system. There are two scholars in Lagos Business School who have written a work on they tried to look at this. It was a study, and which later became a Harvard case, called the Igbo apprentice system, which they wrote a book on. I think the former MD of Transcorp was one of the Vincent. What's his name? The guy who contested. So he was actually one of the authors of the book. So it's quite an interesting book. It's one of the things that we don't have. So for me, if you actually want to do that, some of the things I want to do is like these business schools around Nigeria. I would want to see the Dangote business schools rather than focusing on doing teaching courses that have to do corporate. Can they begin to write cases and teach and understand the old industrialization of Kano State, why businesses in Kano were failing, how it was, so that students who come to school in Kano who want to do business within the north, because that is the hub, we understand. Then, if I want to do an MBA and I want to get into the corporate work, I move to Lagos because that's where they go. So you could do MBAs in different locations to tailor to your needs. Like those who go to the US. Look, if you do an MBA in Harvard and those who do in Yale, those who do in MIT, those who do in Stanford, they don't do the same thing. And they have different focuses. Where Harvard students go to? They go to McKinsey, go to the investment banks. The Stanfords are entrepreneurs, IT. The MITs are engineers. The Yale people are those who believe that businesses should not. It is about business and purpose. And
I kind of like Yale, but I'll have to stop you there. And I know there's this gorge of difference between the thinking in Harvard, and cross the Charles River, and Yale. And there's some sort of competition. And of course, MIT. An MIT and all of that. So, but we have to stop you here. I thank you for coming, Dr. Abdulrauf. I think we have to bring you back again. There are many questions we haven't been able to get to. And dear viewers, thanks for staying with us thus far. And it's been great with Dr. Abdulrauf here. See you next week.